Ladies and gentlemen, we're back with Season 4, Episode 15, Twilight Time. The episode in which the Cutie Mark Crusaders have a moment of time once a week where they spend with Twilight in order to learn things, and that leads to social shenanigans where they end up losing it, but then getting it back again and learn a lesson on the way to the end. So, normally, I've been trying to move these to the front of these. Normally I'd read the journal entry for you here. However, I was just looking at it, because usually what happens is these journal entries are just expanded upon the ones they say in the show, right? Like, the lines they literally say in the show are there, and then, there's the rest of the entry. Unfortunately, in this case, it's a one-to-one. Everything in this entry is what she actually said in the episode, so I'm not even going to bother. There's no reason to. We do have 2 entries for the Breezies next one, so I suppose that'll help make up for it, but I got nothing for today. Also, I have to mention something really quick to Savicom. I know this sounds like a weird thing, but I meant to mention this during Lore Week, but I was busy analyzing Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Unfortunately, I was incapable of giving the new cat scritches because she was doing that I'm a expecting mother and I'm hiding in a safe spot thing and I'm not coming out for anything, which in this case happened to be the very center middle of their bed, so I literally couldn't reach her. So, we're actually trying out something new with the background. This is a completely new everything. Let me know what you think of it. It's a whole other thing. I'll kind of show it off in a minute when we're done with this particular episode. But let's talk about the episode proper, because I actually have a lot to talk about. So, this... Where's my notes? There we go. First of all, let's just get this out of the way here. Let's just get a continuity counter. I'm only going to give 1 for it. But mechanics, magic, and potion making have been established well before now as a thing for the Cutie Mark Crusaders that they're interested in and that they expanded. So it makes perfect sense that they're still interested in it and that they are, learning it from Twilight. So, continuity counter. I also like, I agree with SA2K, I like how this is a Cutie Mark Crusader episode, which, once again, this is the second time this season, does not focus on them getting their cutie marks. There's a reference to it a couple times in the background, but it's not the focus of the episode at all. So, what I like most, in the beginning thing, we see, Scootaloo's kind of failing at mechanics. By the way, of course, someone like Scootaloo would be interested in mechanics, right? I mean, think about her interest in her scooter and building and just the interest level she's shown so far. I could absolutely see her being the kind of person who would work on her own cars, for example. And none of that's an insult. It's just I could totally see that personality coming out of her. There's also Apple Bloom, who's been into potion making since Season 1, I think, whenever Zecora first entered the equation. And she's actually done several potion-related things since then. So again, well established. And someone being into alchemy who works in a farm also kind of makes sense. But then we scoot over to Sweetie Belle, which I have the most to say about. Now, yeah, exactly, SA2K. This is going to sound strange, but I'm very muscular, right? Like, I've talked about that before. My arm, I know you can't really sell because I have this giant baggy coat on, but my arm is literally as large as my head in terms of, So, you're probably thinking, why are you showing off, Lore? Well, I'm not. It didn't used to be. I remember when I couldn't do a single pull-up. I actually distinctly remember the first time I ever did. It was 6th or 7th grade. Those two kind of blur a little bit for me. But it was 6th or 7th grade, and I could point to the spot to you on a map. I could point to the school, and I could point to the exact bar when I finally managed to do that for the first time. And you're probably thinking, well, why is that relevant? Because muscle growth isn't automatic. You don't just... It's not like you grow older and you just become more muscular. Like, it doesn't really work that way. I mean, sure, in a linear sense, an adult will be stronger than a child, but I mean, you don't gain proportional increase in muscular build, right? You have to work for that. You have to train for that. You have to practice for that. And this is especially true, and I can tell you this because I myself have a lot of interest in fitness. You have to know how to exercise. If you just lift weights randomly all over the place, all you're going to do is hurt your joints, right? You need to apply practice to learn the skill of using your muscles. Then you could start building the muscles themselves and breaking it down to make it stronger, right? What does this have to do with anything? This episode and a few other episodes kind of show that that's how magic works for foals, for unicorns, for younger unicorns. They have the initial burst of magic when they're a baby. We've actually already seen that, and we will see that again in the future. But then it goes back down to normal, and then they have to figure out how to make that work, how to make that muscle work, and then how to build it, if they choose to, which they may not. We've also seen several unicorns have basically different strengths, as in how much they can actually use, right? And yeah, Raskar is correct. Sweetie Belle used to barely be able to make a spark come out of the tip of her horn. You'll also notice, this is kind of a cool thing, when she's using magic in this, only the far end of her horn actually ignites with the aura. Now, if you don't know why I'm pointing that out, in contrast, when most unicorns use magic, the entire horn has the magical aura radiating around it, right? Yeah, exactly, Atticus. That's a great example. Rarity doesn't lift heavy things in general because that's not her strength. She didn't do this, right? She didn't build up the muscle. Why would she? She doesn't need to. And Rarity is also very precise with it. She's able to literally stitch and sew with her magic, which is very precise telekinesis, as opposed to use a contrast, Twilight, who is far more and can lift a tree, for example, and does so more than once. I bring all this up because this is the kind of thing I love about this show. This little world building stuff that's in the background, and the way it's just accurately portrayed in the background to help flesh out things, to make it better, for lack of a better word to put it. In fact, I actually want to give another continuity counter for the way that they portray Sweetie Belle in particular. So I'll go ahead and scroll down here. My counter's being weird. There we go. Yeah, Twilight's not a fair barometer, that's true. Most unicorns we see don't lift all that much. And Starlight Glimmer is probably the strongest unicorn in the show, so that's also not what I would call a fair comparison. I'd have to think about another good example on that off the top of my head. But Weods is correct. The heaviest thing I could think of that, and I was actually thinking of the same scene, that I ever see Rarity lift is the dummies when she's doing the dressmaking episode. That was back in Season 2, I think. No, that was Season 1, wasn't it? And that's funny because Season 1 tends to have inconsistent things in general, so whether that counts or not is up to you. But that's still the heaviest thing I could think of that she ever lifted. Moon Dancer. I don't remember Moon Dancer that much. Anyways, I just wanted to talk about that and how I thought that was awesomely done. I also love the core premise here, if I might be so bold. I have noticed that act. Although I think that's a more recent thing, as of Season 2, I want to say. Twilight teaching the kids, right, the younger fillies, things. I was actually thinking about this. I think Twilight would make a very good teacher. Not because she's a really good teacher, because actually she's probably not a good teacher. But because what I mean by that is she's, as we'll see in a future episode, which is actually among my favorite episodes, she only really knows how to teach in one manner, practice and study. Which, as we will discuss in that future episode, not everyone can learn the same way. But Twilight gives a damn and is organized. And those are two extremely invaluable traits. I would rather have someone like Twilight as a teacher who actually gives enough of a crap to really want to teach people than quite a few other people I could mention. So in short, I think it makes perfect sense, and I kind of hope that we would see more of this in the future, but moving on. So, yeah, it's time to talk about the main point of the episode. So you're going to see me use a phrase. I used this phrase so much in my notes, I just started truncating it at SC. Social currency is something I've actually discussed before. I looked up the episode name, Sweet and Elite, which is a Rarity episode. We already talked about social currency. And I'm just going to say right up front, that's probably the biggest weakness of this episode, is that functionally, it serves the same purpose that Sweet and Elite did. It's just Sweet and Elite was with Rarity, who was an adult, and this is with the kids, who are kids. But otherwise, the narrative, the structure, the lesson, the what it teaches the audience are basically the same thing. which I do think is the weakest part of the episode. Yes, this episode is all about social currency, aka a specific variety of political power. Thank you very, very much, Atticus Amundus, for the donate, or for the sub, excuse me, for the subscription. Very much appreciate. Thank you. If you'd like to put that towards increasing priority in a future stream, please let me know, and I will jot it down thusly. Omundson. I think I said your name wrong. God, I suck. I'm sorry. Atticus Omundson. I'm still probably saying it wrong. Moving on. Yeah, I was going to say, of course it's Sweetie Belle. I actually have a note about that, but of course Sweetie Belle, Rarity's sister, would be the kind of person who would be into, whoops, I screwed it up, who would be into social currency. I have to do this in a very specific way. Nope, or else that happens. Then we do this. Nope, it's still doing it. Damn it, I had it for a second there. Hang on a second. There we go. We got it back. Just need to be careful about not alt-tabbing. Yeah, no kidding. So, political power, social currency. We see Diamond Tiara and her talent. This is, I think, the third time this has been established, and this will be something that comes up in the future. Diamond Tiara's talent lends itself towards what I'd usually call the bard. In D&D terms, she has a good charisma stat. She has a high diplomacy. You know, she can roll influence or convince or whatever you want to call it. Right? It's the talky stat. Now, I'll talk more about that in a minute. But we see once again she is very good at that kind of thing. That's her shtick. You know, she's the one who talks her way through encounters, and she of course makes someone else do the things for her, so she seems more impressive. Now, I know that sounds like a horrible thing, but actually on the face of it, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. It's the specific method by which she does it and uses it that's the problem. Because, you know, she's a jerk, right? That's the issue, is that she is a jerk. She is what I would normally refer to as a typical politician. Because there's nothing wrong with having that kind of skill set and using it properly, because there are ways to use that properly. In fact, I would say that kind of person is basically mandatory for a functioning society in many aspects: governmental, military, economic, educational, at multiple levels, right? And yeah, she is an earth pony, which is probably relevant to that at all. Or relevant to that as well. Excuse me, let me say this correctly. This is the kind of thing that you need and is a good val. And I think they were doing this on purpose, because this does pay off in her big episode, which I forget if that's season 4 or 5, but we're still approaching it. So she convinces this, and she has her butler do things for her, and blah, 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 blah. And this then leads to the trio, the Cutie Mark Crusaders, looking at them and like, oh, man, I wish we could use our talents to, let's just say what it is, advance their perceived social status on the playground. Playground politics are something I've talked about a lot, because it's an extremely important part of human development, in my opinion. But this is it boiled down to its most fundamental core. They want to be seen as better by the other kids, which is pretty much the definition of political power, if we're cutting it down to it. It's just, you know, you think, well, what's the point of that? Just let me build up to this a little bit, because this episode does a really good job of showcasing this. So, Diamond Tiara and Silver Spoon, but really Silver Spoon's a hanger-on and doesn't really get a character, so I'm just going to not really talk about her much. Diamond Tiara follows the exact same social currency thing, and she's better at it. In fact, one of the dominant points of this episode is that Sweetie Belle doesn't know what she's doing. She's bad at it, whereas Diamond Tiara is far more skilled at it. Now, Diamond Tiara immediately try to attach themselves to the Cutie Mark Crusaders because of their connection to Twilight. Again, perceived social bump. Oh, well, you're connected to this cool person, and I'm connected to you, therefore I'm higher up on the perceived social status, right? Now, this then leads to the show having a wonderful handle on the concept of social currency, as I've mentioned a few times. Really quick note. Earlier today, we discussed the upcoming Star Trek show Lower Decks and how I hated the art style. watching this so shortly after it reminds me how much I hate that art style because I prefer this one. Now, that's just preference, but I do love the art style of this show. There's a lot of nuance and details that I don't think I even noticed before. Like, for example, one of the things that bothers me in Lower Decks and that art style, which is becoming a common art style in Western animation, is everything's flat. Like, imagine if I was a cartoon right now, my coat would be one shade, one exact gradient of black. You know, 00000 or whatever. And that's it. That would be the whole code. But on MLP, you would see light shadings. Like maybe it starts off kind of 000 and then it goes out a few degrees towards more gray out this or something like that. Perfect example of this is Diamond Tiara herself. The pink that she is, or the kind of whatever color you want to call that, is gradient from front to back. And you can see it, especially if you're paying attention. Just little stuff like that really helps make this work a lot better for me in terms of art style. I just want to comment on that briefly because, like I said, I was looking at Lower Decks today. So, moving on. So, Diamond Tiara starts talking up all the things Twilight is, as if Twilight does them. Now, this is an interesting thing. This is one of the most surprisingly subtle parts of the entire episode. Because what she does is she acts, well, as we'll discover later, exactly like her mother would. Oh, I love what you're doing with your hair. Is that a new stylist? You've got to tell me which stylist you're using. Oh, the way you've decorated this room is phenomenal. It really brings things out. I should think about doing this sort of thing. Right? I wrote them down. She specifically calls out the way Twilight is dyeing her tail and the way she's decorated her library with books. She does it so automatically because that's what you're supposed to do when you're in that kind of social, aristocratic, whatever you want to call it, situation. That's how you're supposed to act. She does it automatically, probably because she has learned it from her mother, but her mother would probably do it automatically too for a completely different reason. Because her mother would do it because that's what you're supposed to do. Hear me out for a second, because what's brilliant about this is neither of these things are anything that Twilight did. They're simply who Twilight is. And that is bloody brilliant right there. Because it shows in such a wonderfully subtle way the distinction between being who you are, you know, just simply being, and the kind of, let's call it what it is, phonies that the aristocratic elite tend to embody. Because, of course, Twilight has to dye her tail to look like that. I mean, you have to dye your tail, right? To look better than you do. And you have to decorate your room to look better than it does, right? You have to do that. Otherwise, people might see you as the filthy commoner that you might appear to be, and that's unacceptable. But Twilight, of course, is just kind of nonplussed. That's just my regular tail. That's how it actually is. And I just like books. I love that bit. It's a damned shame that Diamond Tiara is learning from her mother more than she is her father. I get the impression from the future episode that I keep referencing that Diamond Tiara spends more time with her mother and her father spending more time actually running the business and doing his thing. Because every time we see Filthy Rich show up, he's fine. Like, he's actually a decent, rich person, you know, the reasonable authority figure kind of a thing. And you can't tell me he would raise Diamond Tiara to be like this. If anything, I would imagine he's not quite aware of it. I have further evidence to give for that, but we'll see that again when that really comes up. Diamond Tiara is going to have an episode pretty much all to her in a future episode. It's actually among my favorite episodes. I'm looking forward to talking about it. So we'll leave that for the future. Either way, so she praises the things that Twilight is, and then the episode really gets fun, because then Diamond Tiara starts spreading word about the visit to Twilight to specifically boost the Cutie Mark Crusader status. Now, why would she do that? Well, because that boosts her status. Now, not only has she... So, this is wonderful, and this is exactly how this kind of social economics actually works. This is... Twilight is perceived to be cool by Diamond Tiara, right? Well, actually, I would argue no. I don't think Twilight is perceived to be cool. I think Twilight is perceived to be potentially cool, to be potentially perceived as socially uplifted or higher up on the tier. She's a princess, after all, right? So, what she does is she goes ahead and goes out to visit to make sure that she has that initial connection. She's the first link in the chain. Now, she goes talking to all the other kids in the school, talking up how awesome Twilight is. Now, Twilight's been a bit of a celebrity and a princess, so a bit of a celebrity for a while, and a princess recently. If people really were gushing about her that much, they already would be. But by all accounts, she doesn't have what we would call a celebrity life. Which means the reason that all these kids really gush about her is because Diamond Tiara talked her up. Diamond Tiara raises the perceived value of Twilight, which then raises, by natural consequence, the perceived value of the Cutie Mark Crusaders, which by natural consequence raises her perceived value. Like I said, brilliant and accurate presentation of social economics. Thank you very, very much, Sword of the Morning 14. As always, appreciate the sub. Thank you. If you happen to know where you'd like to put that, please let me know, and I will jot it down in these notes so I don't screw up the background. So what Diamond Tiara does here is one-to-one. This is how this kind of economic system works. And you'll notice immediately after that, the next thing she does is she says, oh, if you want to hang out with Twilight just like I do, form a line, no pushing. They have a frickin' list, for God's sakes. So now Diamond Tiara is being pushed up even further. Arguably further than the Cutie Mark Crusaders themselves, because, well, the Cutie Mark Crusaders are the one-to-one point to Twilight, whose value's been jumped up. The only access point, the only one who's selling tickets, is Diamond Tiara. This is why I think she does learn at least a little bit from her father, by the way. Because even though it's social economics, what she does is actually good economics. She quickly and efficiently identifies a point of value and says, yep, I'm going to be in there and I'm going to sell it to you. For relatively cheap, don't worry. Now you might think, well, hang on. Laura, you keep talking about this. Economics is about the transit of goods and or services. Hear me out for a second. So, the episode moves on a little bit, and everyone's perceived value goes up, and we have our first little thing, and blah, 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 blah. This leads to... This places her in a little bit of economic debt to the Cutie Mark Crusaders. First point. I want to mention that because that's going to be important in a minute. So, remember, because she has now gained off of her connection to the CMC, she now owes the CMC, okay? So remember that. Now, you'll also notice that Sweetie Belle, throughout the episode, and I already mentioned this, but this is when it really became obvious, Sweetie Belle tries to do the same thing and fails at it. Now, again, this makes sense. She hasn't been doing it her whole life like Diamond Tiara has, and she doesn't have two parents, both of whom practice these practices above her. She has her, she has Rarity. And we do know Rarity does practice social economics and social currency. Sweet and Elite, I already mentioned that. So you can see how eventually Sweetie Belle might become this kind of a person. And will probably be what I call a good aristocrat, like Fancy Pants, I think, was him. We've actually seen a couple of good aristocrats over the course of the show. The show makes a point of showing us good and bad. So I could see her, it is Sweet Fancy Pants. I could see her becoming a Fancy Pants in the future. And yeah, she squeaked so much. I wondered if something was going on with the actress. Squeak! She was doing the voice crack thing. Anyways, so this leads to a wonderful section here. This is actually when I talk about the social currency thing. So in my notes, this is when I talk about what I just talked about. But then this leads to a wonderful scene. So we go to the diner. Really quick. Gross. Why, does Twilight not know how to eat without, ketchup and everything getting everywhere? Just what the hell? Although, as an aside, I love the idea of hay burgers and horseshoe fries. I almost wish we could see more of that, but that's neither here nor there. So she goes, and there's some slapstick, and she goes outside, and she starts signing autographs. She uses her burger as a napkin, for God's sakes. This then leads to Twilight not understanding social economics at all, which I love, because of course she wouldn't. Why would she? We'll actually have an episode in the future about how much Twilight doesn't really understand friendship and how much that bothers her. It's another good episode that we'll be coming to later on. So naturally, Twilight isn't even thinking in the direction of social economics. Instead, she's just like, oh, hi. Oh, I don't actually come to this restaurant all that often. I only went because they invited me. Wait, the Cutie Mark Crusaders decide where the princess goes? What Twilight has just done, unknowingly and unthinkingly, is elevated the Cutie Mark Crusaders' perceived value even higher than hers, pushing them up to here, to go back to my earlier visual presentation. So now everyone's like, oh my god, we've got to do this. This then leads to, finally, the episode starts to discuss social currency spending. Could you come to my lemonade stand opening? Well, why? Now, the funny thing is the episode's actually, in many ways, does the Sweet and Elite thing better. Because the same thing happened to Rarity back in Sweet and Elite. Oh, you have to come to my art thing. You have to come to my auction. Because that's what's going to make it actually worthwhile. That's going to make it, you know, other people think it's worthwhile because you are here and that elevates its status. But here, they say it more, it's more understated and thus, in my opinion, better presented. Please come to my lemonade stand. And she comes, you know, the three of them come, and there's lots of people there buying lemonade. Why? Because its prestige status was elevated because the Cutie Mark Crusaders are sponsoring and endorsing that. Now, we live in a cynical society, but I bet even right now there are people who are celebrities who, if they endorsed something, you would probably be more inclined to buy that good or service. Depending, obviously, if they endorse, you know, machetes and you're not into machetes, then that's not going to work, right? But if someone you think is actually legit, Keanu Reeves maybe, or I'm trying to think of people here. Keanu brand toothpaste. I mean, you know. I'm just saying, SA2K. If you saw something like that, I bet you'd at least be more inclined to be positively inclinated toward it rather than otherwise. Yeah, and it does depend on the specifics and blah, 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 blah. But I'm just saying, even amongst today's cynical society, that's still a thing. That's actually why those kind of actor endorsements are a thing. Now, that's a great example, Larian. Thank you. Critical Role has endorsed several things. I suppose I could also mention that Geek and Sundry showcased several board games, which got me interested in those board games, and I ended up then purchasing them because of the fact that they inclined me that way. Now, in fairness, those board games were actually fun and interesting to do, but you see my point. So, the Lemonade Stand is now more... This is a great song for this. The Lemonade Stand is more successful because the Cutie Mark Crusaders, who are the ones who decide where the princess goes at this point, I remind you, have endorsed it. This is when social currency starts to be spent. Because the transaction here is they actually get free lemonade for a week. That is now an actual, tangible good and or service which has been transacted for the social currency of boosting and endorsing it so that he can get more sales. He gets more sales, they get free lemonade. Social economics, right there, 101. I really like this episode if it's not obvious. This is going to be a red at the very least. This then leads to a quick showcasing of a couple of other things. Scootaloo gets her hooves shined, and Apple Bloom gets the touch-up on her bow. Again, tangible good service, actually, which I like that they did a service. Tangible service for Scootaloo, and a good, well, I totally just service, but still, for the bow. Tangible, actual economic currency spending, or excuse me, social currency spending at this point. This then leads to the big one. Now, you remember how I mentioned earlier that Diamond Tiara was in their debt? Well, naturally, what she does is she gets out of that debt by paying it back by inviting them to the pool party. Now, you might think, oh, whoop-de-doo, but you can see, especially based on the circumstances, how that is her squaring that debt away. She is effectively setting the board back clean and resetting her economic status so that she is once again in the black by pulling them and specifically telling everyone else and inviting her in public and telling everyone else they're going and not inviting them. This actually accomplishes two objectives. First, it elevates... Well, hang on. That's the second thing I want to talk about. First, it pays everything off, and now, again, a tangible thing. But second of all, this is a better pool party. It's so awesome because no one else is invited. That is, again, classic economics of any variety, social or otherwise. Rarity almost always inflates perceived value. And I say perceived value because it doesn't necessarily inflate literal value. It can. If right now 99% of the gold in the world was just, actually it would be this finger, wouldn't it? Was just snapped out of existence, gold's perceived value and actual value would go up substantially because of its rarity. However, recently, just last week or the week before, there was a cartridge, an NES cartridge of Super Mario Bros. 1, which was sold for 6 digits, like I think $115,000, something like that. That's perceived value without actual value. You know why? Because I could play Super Mario Bros. Right now in like 5 different ways. It's not actually rare. You could say that copy's actually rare, but the actual resource itself is not rare. I can still play Mario Brothers. It's not like there's only 3 copies and that's the only way to play it in the world. So that's perceived value being elevated. That's how collection markets work in general. So, and yeah, this is how diamond industries function. Diamond industries in general elevate perceived value ahead of actual value. So, anyways. So this pool party is a perfect example of that. God, I love this episode. I'm sorry. It's just they hit so many notes so perfectly. Because then, immediately afterwards, oh, you're bringing us with you, right? No, we can't. Sorry. This is when Diamond Tiara finally starts saying outright what they've been doing. You think we... Yeah, I know, right? You think we actually want to shine your hooves and give you free lemonade and invite you to our exclusive pool party? We're not doing this out of the kindness of our hearts. This is a transaction, which you are now in debt to us for. You need to bring us to Twilight time in order to pay off your debt. Now, this is actually interesting in its own right, because it could be argued that they're not in debt at that point. But whether they are or not doesn't matter, because it's been called into question audibly. I did this for you, don't you owe me? Makes a perceived debt exist, whether one exists or not. We could actually sit down and math it out and debate if that debt actually exists. But the fact that they now think they're in debt means that debt is now a perception. And remember, a lot of economics, as I've been talking about this whole time, is about perception. That's why I keep making the distinction between perceived and real, right? So now that that debt has been called into question, and then of course, Diamond Tiara, once again showing that she's the talkie stat, pulls in the others. What do you think you're going to do with them? And the others are like, Twilight time! Twilight time! Also, zombie references zombie, which actually made me smile, I'll admit. I don't think... Well, I'll get to that in a second, SA2K. So, and they rush out, the kids as zombies. This is also the third time Sweetie Belle said, I know exactly how to handle this. Except this time her plan is run! I am probably aware of social contract theory, but I don't know what it is off the top of my head. I mean, that's absolutely correct, Atticus. You're absolutely right. If people think an economy is doing well, then it is. It will do better. This is historically proven going back to the Roman era, which is the earliest I've actually started studying economics. The economics of the Roman eras are fascinating, by the way, but I don't want to get off on that right now. Point being, it's the exact same opposite. The whole point of a runaway collapse, economically speaking, almost always happens because people think the economy is doing badly, which makes the economy do worse. Perceived value is extremely important to economic interaction, even though it shouldn't be, if we're being honest with ourselves, because there is still a tangible element to economics. I tease it at its most basic level. These carrots are a real thing that I can consume and gain actual tangible value out of, right? Like this right here is the bedrock of economics, goods and services. Anyways, so they run, and they run off to Twilight, and Twilight Twilight hesitates for a second when she sees the crowd, and then she's like, "Okay, sure. I was just saying that for your sake." Now, SA2K asked in chat, do I think Twilight knew what was going on at this point? I think that's the exact moment she figured it out. I think that's the exact moment she deduced what was going on and was like, okay, sure. If this gets more kids to learn, why not? Remember, passion. Because of course Twilight will be okay about teaching more kids who want to learn, right? The question is, of course, if they do in fact want to learn. This then leads to her direct question. This is when things really become amusing because she straight out asks, I forget his name, Pipsqueak, I think. What would you like to learn? I want to learn to be a cutie mark crusader. And why would you want to learn that? Because then I could get all my classmates to do me favors and stuff because I'm friends with a famous princess. Now, first of all, that is, of course, when Twilight realizes, the full nature of what's going on, and that none of these kids here want to learn, probably including the Cutie Mark Crusaders. But what's really interesting about that is that's a good lesson. Learning social economics and politics and learning how to be a talker is a very valuable skill. I'm admittedly a little biased here, of course. But the fact remains, what he asks to learn is not something that is an invalid lesson to be taught. That being said, Twilight is absolutely not the person to teach that. And his motives for learning it are probably incredibly wrong, to put it bluntly. He wants to learn it for the same reason Diamond Tiara tends to use that exact same skill set. For self-aggrandizement and nothing else. So this then leads to her being like, oh, okay, I see. And they're like, no, we really did want to learn. Prove it. And I love Twilight's reaction to that. Just prove it. Once again, tangible. If you actually cared about learning, then you would have already done the effort to learn. This then leads to the screw-up scene, where Sweetie Belle really proves why she is nowhere near as good at this as Diamond Tiara or her elder sister. See, rolling with the punches is a good skill, but in order to roll with the punches, you need to know where you're rolling. Like when Han Solo talks his way around something, when he tries to maneuver his way through a situation, he has a direction he's going in. It's not like... What Sweetie Belle effectively does is the equivalent of Han Solo saying, oh, you want me to jump into that pit? Well, sure, I'll jump into that pit, but first you need to add more spikes to it. Okay, now that it's even more of a dangerous situation, I'll jump into the pit. Ah, stab! And Han Solo's dead. I'm putting this into a weird analogy because I'm trying to get across the point that what Sweetie Belle is doing is desperate backwalking, not rolling with it. She's just like, okay, no, we'll prove it, even though we literally can't. So they fail, plong, and, okay, sure, we'll learn in the future, yada, 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 and the episode kind of starts to wind itself down. Also, poor Spike and his nachos. Is that just me? Like, first of all, it's a huge waste of nachos, but second of all, it looks really good. I wish I was eating nachos right now. God. Anyways. And then the episode ends, and I don't... the episode ends... I would like to argue for a wah-wah here. Because that's a really big wah-wah. I mean, Twilight even laughs into the credits. Were they really Suffocom? I'm sorry, I was not paying attention to that. Oh, we're actually up to 8. I'm keeping track of these. What do we have with crushes? I should double check my notes here. Up to 12, 38, 2.5, 14, 94, and 12. There we go. I mean, at least Spike could eat the nachos, right? Anyways, so then they have the lesson, then the episode ends. The end. I find myself wondering if this episode was intended to be as fascinating as it is. This is by Dave Polsky, excuse me. And he has an extremely mixed credit series. Like, 2 of the blue episodes, which is the worst rating I've given, have been from him, which is Over a Barrel and Spike at Your Service. He's also had 2 red episodes, which is the second highest rating I could give, which is Keep Calm and Flutter On and Rarity Takes Manhattan. Now, I'm sorry, guys. I think I've spent enough time gushing about this that I have to give this a red. This is a surprisingly interesting and good character episode, which also has fascinating topics to cover, and multiple interesting lessons, and is a very accurate portrayal of playground politics, and is the kind of thing kids need to learn, and is still relevant for adults, and just blah, 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 blah. I think there's a lot that pushes this episode up, in my opinion. Yeah, I know. Gotta be organized, Savicom. So that's my thoughts on this one. I'm going to chop off the local recording really quick.